Hello, Laine. This is me responding to your paper one. Okay. A field that I'm interested in learning more about is the field of physical therapy. I'm interested in sciences and also being able to work with and help people. At first, I had difficulty coming up with research questions about this field as I did not know much about it at all, so I found it hard to find a place to start. While researching the field of physical therapy very generally, the name Emma Vogel popped up a few times, which led me to question who is Emma Vogel and how did she impact the field of PT? Emma E. Vogel was the first chief of Women's Medical Specialist Corps who got her physical therapy training at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and she began her service to the Army in 1919, where she was appointed a physical therapist at Army General Hospital number 24 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Whew! Okay. You have a fine introduction. It's not fancy, but it's totally fine. The first sentence in your second paragraph, though, there, when I run out of breath trying to read the sentence, that's always a note to me that that needs to be split up into more sentences. Just helps your reader to separate the information, make sure it's all clear. So let's definitely split that one up, although it's lots of good info. She was one of the first women who was in charge of a medical corps in the military. An article written by the something talks about Vogel and how she assisted in creating training programs in the U.S. Her physical therapy, quote, her physical therapy training was due to the Army's interest in rehabilitating soldiers wounded during the Great War. There was no formal training courses in physical therapy in the United States prior to World War I. In 1922, Ms. Vogel helped organize the first training course for physical therapists. Okay. There's nothing wrong with using that as a direct quote, using the words directly from the source, but you don't need to. You could just explain that stuff. You kind of already explained that stuff. How about you? Let's see. And I mean, this does help a little bit. I'll look smarter anyway. So what you did in paraphrasing the information, you paraphrased that she went to Reed, that she started in 1919, all that stuff. You could also paraphrase the other information. And the reason I'm telling you to do that is because direct quotes we want to use when there's something like really compelling, really interesting, really powerful about the exact words in the source that we're using. And I mean, that to me, it looks like, there's no special way that they've put that. There's no particular reason to quote the exact words. So I would also just paraphrase that bit. Okay, not only was Vogel one of the first physical therapists to assist with injuries caused by the war, but she was also the one who organized formal training for other PTs to come after her to help create more standard practices for the field to help more injured people. That's another sentence that's a little long. Yeah, that one could use some cutting too. One thing that's often happening for people at this point in their writing development when they are doing their undergrad is how to write these long, complex, grammatically standard and following all the rule sentences. However, just because you can, this is often a moment I say, I know you can, but should you? It really helps your reader, in my experience, as both a reader and a writer, it really helps to have some short sentences in there. They're kind of a place for your reader to rest and be like, oh, okay, here we are, I get it. Like you did when you asked the real simple question I'm seeing in this next paragraph, how did the military shape the field of physical therapy, right? Having that one shorter piece helps to helps your reader to focus in on what you want them to focus on. Okay, after learning about Emma Vogel and how she impacted the field while being part of the military, I became more curious about military involvement in this field, which led me to the question, how did the military shape the field of physical therapy? You're kind of repeating yourself. And you have a full 3 pages. When you revise, oh, sorry, go away, it'll pop up. When you revise, go ahead and cut whatever you think you can cut because you don't need it. And if it's shorter than 3 pages, that's totally fine. Going forward, if you're concerned about making something long enough, it's better to add another example. It's better to add, one more viewpoint on something than to make your professor start to feel like, a lot of words that aren't saying anything. Okay. When PTs were first enlisted in the military, they did not have official status despite being essential personnel in the recovery of the injured soldiers during the war. Yikes. Emma Vogel again helped with this process to achieve status for physical therapy in the military. Quote, the long struggle for military status for therapists was achieved in January 1943 by Public Law 77-828, which granted them relative rank. The Secretary of War designated Miss Vogel as Director of Physical Therapy Aids. Commissioned in the grade of Major, she was the first physical therapist to be commissioned under this law. That's another place, I don't feel like you have to use the exact words, but I think the exact words are kind of cool, especially when you get into commissioned in the grade of Major. She was the first physical therapist to be commissioned under this law. So I'm gonna let that stand. One other tiny thing, because that usury or whatever it is, comma 2 is part of the sentence before it. It's part of the one that ends in law, actually. Your period goes after the parentheses. Okay, Vogel helped PTs achieve military status for the first time and was the first PT to hold this rank. According to an article written by the American Physical Therapy Association, the first physical therapist for reconstruction aids, re-aids, civilian employees of the medical department of the U.S. Army during World War I who rehabilitated injured soldiers and taught them how to adapt to everyday life after injuries and amputations. The military clearly was a major influence to the beginning of the field of PT, since the injuries that came from the war needed to be treated by people who could help the victims adapt to their new life. These people were physical therapists. So my question then is, why was it this war and not, the Civil War or an earlier war? Maybe we'll get into that. The article goes on to quote a chief of the Women's Medical Specialist Corps, Emma Vogel, who said that, wait a minute. You're telling us who Emma Vogel is multiple times. We only need to know who she is once. And you told us, this is just really feeling repetitive. Something to fix in revision. Very few physicians perform physical therapy procedures which were looked upon, you're missing a word there, with suspicion by many of their colleagues. It was not a defined discipline with clear standards or guidelines. The article is explaining how before PTs were prevalent in the military, they did not have clearly defined regulations and had little respect in the medical field. I feel like we've already said that, though. Vogel also stated the Army played a key role in, quote, stabilizing and standardizing physical therapy procedures. Kind of repetitive also. In addition to helping introduce the field of PT to the world, the military also contributed to validating PT as an actual career and to put to rest some concern about its legitimacy, as well as aiding in the beginning of standard practices of medicine for this field. Okay. Rather than repeating some stuff that you've already said, I'm wondering, and maybe you do get into this later, when we say that they aided in the beginning of standard practices, what practices? Getting into those details will help keep you from repeating yourself. What standards were set up for practices at that point? In addition to clearly defining PT procedures, the military also was the first organization to train physical therapy assistance technicians. Before people were actually trained to assist PTs, men who were enlisted in combat roles would help in the clinics. Yeah. Makes sense. In 1945, the Army approved the first formal program of instruction for the new classification of physical therapy technicians. This official training for PT technicians was another way that the military helped legitimize the field. Okay. The way that you, after your quote, restate what your quote said is perfect and beautiful. Please keep doing that. But I think this is another example of a quote that we don't really need to be a direct quote, and also something I think you've already said. Well, no, you haven't. No, you haven't said, okay, there was a formal program of instruction. Ms. Skirman, back off. Yeah, you haven't said that. You haven't said that already. But that is one I wouldn't directly quote. In going deeper, though, especially with your revision, like what was the formal program of instruction? Again, that's a way you can get in deeper with this. Okay, after learning more about the military, I became curious about minorities and disabled people and what the field did to help them. This led me to question, how did physical therapy become more tailored toward disabled people and or minority groups? An article written by the APTA about 100 major milestones talks about how on November 29, 1975, President Gerald Ford signed into law the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, later called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The article also talks about provisions that were made through the years to this law that included provisions for adults, infants, and toddlers. This act allowed physical therapists to move into schools and began helping another population of Americans. Okay. So the direct quote here is what date Ford signed it and what it was called. Okay, definitely you don't need to direct quote that. You can just do the whole thing, paraphrasing it, putting in your own words, but mentioning where this information came from. Yeah. The article did mention how, in 1986, as one of the efforts to address the scarcity of financial support for minority students enrolled in physical therapy education programs, the AAPTA established the Minority Scholarship Fund, which was not talking about how the field became more tailored towards minorities, but rather how it included minorities in the field by providing scholarships for them to help them have more access to the programs that will allow them to become PTs. Cool. Did you let us know that thing may very well not have page numbers? I know most of the things we look at now don't have page numbers. After finding out more about minority groups, I'm still curious about how other groups that may have been involved. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm still curious about other groups that may have been involved. Did immigrants have an impact on the practices or medicine involved in physical therapy? Did immigrants have the same access to PT help that Americans did when they emigrated? Okay. And you end with questions. Okay, I'm just glancing at your bibliography. One little thing is, although mostly it looks good, one little thing is they need to be in alphabetical order. And I think the numeral one, so that one with 100, goes first in alphabetical order. Honestly, I don't remember that ever coming up before, but definitely the usury goes after staff, right? So those need to be in alphabetical order. Okay, so for your revision, definitely the main thing is to maybe a couple places dig into getting more details in there so you can avoid repeating yourself. But the stuff that was in there, I really enjoyed learning about. I had no idea this person, and a woman, led the way in this field. So that's cool. Thanks for your paper.